The Moon Over the Mountain, by Atsushi Nakajima. Li Zheng of Longxi was a man of wide learning and brilliant gifts. In the closing years of the Tianmao era, while still young, he passed the highest imperial examination and was subsequently appointed to a minor district post in Jiangnan. But he was proud and unyielding, with an exceedingly high opinion of himself, and could not bring himself to remain a lowly official. Before long he resigned his post, withdrew to his native hills at Guolu, cut himself off from society, and devoted himself entirely to poetry. Rather than serve for years in a humble office, bending his knee before vulgar dignitaries, he meant to leave behind a poet's name that would endure 100 years after his death. Yet literary fame did not come easily, and his livelihood grew harder by the day. Gradually Li Zheng became consumed by impatience. From about this time his features too grew gaunt and severe, the flesh fell from his face, the bones stood out, and only his eyes shone with a desperate intensity. Nowhere could one find the likeness of the full-cheeked, handsome youth who had once passed the imperial examination. Several years later, unable to endure his poverty, he humbled himself for the sake of food and clothing for his wife and children, went east once more, and accepted a post as a provincial official. This was also partly because he had despaired of his poetic work. His former peers had already risen to offices far above his own, and it is not difficult to imagine how deeply the brilliant Li Zheng of former days was wounded by having to obey men whom he had formerly dismissed as dullards beneath his notice. Bitter and joyless, he found his violent, wayward nature increasingly difficult to restrain. A year later, while traveling on official business, he lodged beside the Ru River and at last went mad. In the middle of one night he suddenly sprang from his bed, his face transformed, shouted something unintelligible, leapt down to the ground, and ran into the darkness. He never returned. Searchers found no trace of him in the surrounding hills and fields. No one knew what became of Li Zheng thereafter. The following year, an investigating censor named Yuan Can of Qinjun was traveling under imperial orders to Lingnan and lodged on the way at Shanyu.
When he prepared to leave before dawn the next morning, the keeper of the post station warned him that a man-eating tiger haunted the road ahead, so travelers could not pass until full daylight. Since it was still early, the man advised him to wait a little longer.
Trusting in the size of his retinue, however, Yuan Can dismissed the warning and set out. As they crossed a grassy clearing in the forest by the light of the waning moon, a fierce tiger did indeed spring from the thicket. It seemed about to pounce on Yuan Can, but suddenly wheeled around and vanished back into the brush. From within came a human voice, repeatedly murmuring,
"That was close."
Yuan Can recognized the voice. Even in his terror, realization came to him at once, and he cried,
"Is that the voice of my friend Li Zheng?"
Yuan Can and Li Zheng had passed the imperial examination in the same year, and for Li Zheng, who had few friends, Yuan Can had been the closest. Perhaps Yuan Can's gentle disposition had never clashed with Li Zheng's harsh and uncompromising temperament. For a while there was no answer from the thicket. Only now and then came a faint sound that might have been stifled weeping. At length a low voice replied,
"It is indeed I, Li Zheng of Longxi."
Forgetting his fear, Yuan Can dismounted, approached the thicket, and warmly exchanged greetings after their long separation. Then he asked why Li Zheng would not come out. Li Zheng's voice answered,
"I have now taken on the body of a beast. How could I shamelessly expose this wretched form before an old friend? Besides, if I showed myself, I would surely fill you with fear and revulsion. And yet, meeting an old friend so unexpectedly has made me forget even my shame, so great is my longing. Please, if only for a little while, do not reject me for the hideous shape I now wear. Will you speak with the man who was once your friend Li Zheng?"
Looking back, it seemed strange, but at the time Yuan Can simply accepted this supernatural marvel without question. He ordered his attendants to halt the procession and stood beside the thicket, conversing with the unseen voice. They spoke of rumors from the capital, of old friends and what had become of them, and of Yuan Can's present rank, on which Li Zheng congratulated him, all in the frank, unguarded tone of men who had been close in their youth. When they had finished, Yuan Can asked how Li Zheng had come to his present state. The voice among the grasses told the following story.
It was about a year ago. I was traveling and had stopped for the night beside the Ru River. After sleeping for a time, I woke suddenly and heard someone outside calling my name. I went out in answer, and the voice kept beckoning to me from the darkness. Without thinking, I began to run after it. As I raced on in a frenzy, the road somehow entered a mountain forest, and before I knew it I was running with both hands clawing at the earth. My whole body seemed filled with power, and I bounded lightly over rocks. Then I noticed what felt like hair growing over my hands and elbows. When dawn began to break, I leaned over a mountain stream and looked at my reflection. I had already become a tiger. At first I refused to believe my eyes. Then I thought it must be a dream. I had dreamed before and known within the dream that I was dreaming. But when I was forced to understand that this was no dream, I stood dumbfounded. Then I was afraid, profoundly afraid, because I realized that anything at all could happen. But why had this happened to me? I did not know. In truth, we understand nothing. To accept without protest what is imposed upon us for reasons we do not know, and to go on living without knowing those reasons, that is the fate of every living creature. My first thought was to die. But at that instant a rabbit darted across my path, and the human being within me vanished. When the human within me awoke again, my mouth was smeared with the rabbit's blood and its fur lay scattered around me. That was my first experience as a tiger. What deeds I have continued to commit from that day to this, I cannot bear to tell. Yet for several hours every day, the mind of a man invariably returns to me. During those hours I can speak human language as I once did, sustain complex thought, and recite passages from the Confucian classics. When, with that human mind, I look upon the traces of my own brutality as a tiger and consider my fate, I feel more wretched, terrified, and enraged than at any other time. But those hours in which I return to humanity grow shorter day by day. Until recently I wondered why I had ever become a tiger. Then, the other day, I suddenly found myself wondering why I had once been a man. That is a terrifying thing. Before long, the human mind within me will be completely buried and extinguished beneath the habits of the beast, just as the foundation stones of an ancient palace are gradually buried beneath earth and sand. Then at last I shall forget my past entirely, rage through the world as a mere tiger, and even if I met you on the road as I have today, I would not recognize an old friend. I would tear you apart and devour you without the least remorse. Perhaps every beast and every human being was once something else. At first each remembers, but little by little the memory disappears, until each believes it has always existed in its present form. No, never mind that. Once the human mind within me has vanished entirely, perhaps I shall be happier that way. And yet the man within me regards that prospect with the utmost horror. Ah, how terrifying, how sad, how unbearable it is to know that I shall lose the memory of having been human. No one can understand this feeling. No one, unless he has met with the same fate. But before I cease to be human altogether, I have one request to make of you.
Yuan Can and all his company listened breathlessly to the marvel related by the voice in the thicket. The voice continued.
It is simply this. I had always intended to make my name as a poet, yet before my work was accomplished, this fate overtook me. I composed several hundred poems, none of which, of course, have yet circulated in the world. By now no one may even know where the manuscripts are. But I can still recite several dozen of them from memory. I want you to have them transcribed and preserved for me. It is not that I hope thereby to pass myself off as an accomplished poet. Whether the poems are good or bad, I devoted my whole life to them, though they ruined my fortunes and drove me mad. If I cannot pass even a portion of them down to posterity, I shall not be able to rest even in death.
Yuan Can ordered one of his men to take up a brush and write at the dictation of the voice in the thicket. Li Yung's voice rang out clearly from among the grasses. There were some 30 poems, long and short, all elevated in style and exceptional in conception. A single reading was enough to reveal the uncommon talent of their author. Yet even as Yuan Can admired them, he vaguely felt this. There could be no doubt that the author's natural gifts were of the highest order, and yet, as the poems stood, something, in some almost imperceptible respect, seemed to be missing before the poems could be called works of the highest order. When Li Yung's voice had finished pouring forth the poems of his former days, its tone changed abruptly. With a note of self-mockery, he said,
"Shameful though it is, even now, reduced to this wretched form, I sometimes dream that my collection of poems lies on the desks of Chang'an's fashionable men of letters. I dream it while lying in a cavern. Laugh at me. Laugh at the pitiful man who failed to become a poet and became a tiger instead."
Yuan Can listened sadly, remembering the self-mocking habit of the young Li Yung he had once known.
"Yes. And for one more laugh, shall I put my present feelings into an impromptu poem? Let it be proof that the Li Yung of old still lives within this tiger."
Yuan Can again ordered a subordinate to write down the words. The poem ran.
"Madness came by chance and made me a creature apart, calamity followed calamity, there was no escape. Who now would dare withstand these claws and fangs? Yet once our names and reputations rose side by side. I, a strange beast, crouch beneath the tangled grass, you ride in a light carriage, proud in power and state. Tonight, amid streams and mountains, facing the bright moon, I cannot chant at length, I can only howl."
The waning moon shone cold. White dew lay thick upon the ground, and the chill wind moving through the trees already announced the approach of dawn. The men had forgotten the strangeness of the event and stood in solemn silence, mourning the unhappy fortune of the poet. Li Yung's voice began again.
"A moment ago I said I did not know why this fate had befallen me. Yet, seen another way, it is not as though nothing occurs to me. When I was a man, I made a point of avoiding all association with others. People called me arrogant and overbearing. What they did not know was that this was, in truth, almost a form of shame. Of course, I will not deny that I, once called the eccentric genius of my native district, possessed my share of pride. But it was what one might call cowardly pride. Though I wished to make my name through poetry, I did not seek out a master, nor did I cultivate fellow poets and strive with them to hone my art. Yet neither could I bring myself to take my place among common mediocrities. Both refusals sprang from my cowardly pride and my haughty shame. Fearing that I might not be a jewel, I would not submit to the labor of polishing myself, yet half believing that I must be a jewel, I could not quietly take my place among common tiles. Little by little I withdrew from the world and kept others at a distance. Through resentment and shame-laden anger, I merely fed and fattened the cowardly pride within me. Every man is a tamer of beasts, and the beast he must tame is his own nature. In my case, that haughty shame was the beast. It was the tiger. It injured me, tormented my wife and children, wounded my friends, and finally transformed my outward shape into one that matched my inner heart. Looking back now, I see that I utterly squandered the little talent I possessed. I amused myself with glib maxims, life is too long to spend doing nothing, yet too short to bring any one undertaking to completion, but in truth, all that lay beneath them was a coward's fear that hard work might expose the limits of my gifts, and an indolence that shrank from the labor itself. There are any number of men far less gifted than I who became distinguished poets because they devoted themselves wholly to refining what talent they had. Only now, reduced to a tiger, have I finally understood. The thought still burns my heart with regret. I can no longer live as a man. Even if I were to compose some superb poem in my mind today, by what means could I publish it? Worse still, my mind draws nearer to that of a tiger with every passing day. What am I to do? What of my squandered past? The anguish becomes unbearable. At such times I climb the rock on the summit of that mountain and roar into the empty valley. I want someone to hear the sorrow burning in my breast. Last night, too, I roared at the moon from that place, hoping someone might understand my suffering. But the beasts hear my voice and can do nothing but cower and prostrate themselves in terror. The mountain, the trees, the moon, and the dew see only a tiger raging and bellowing. Though I leap toward heaven and cast myself upon the earth in grief, not one creature understands what I feel, just as, when I was a man, no one understood the wounded heart within me. It is not the night dew alone that has wet my fur.
At last the darkness around them began to thin. Somewhere among the trees, a mournful dawn horn sounded. Li Zheng's voice said,
I must bid you farewell now. The hour of frenzy, the hour when I must return to the tiger, is drawing near. But before we part, I have one more favor to ask. It concerns my wife and children. They are still in Guolu. Naturally, they cannot know what has become of me. When you return from the south, would you tell them that I am already dead? Please, never reveal what happened here today. It is an impertinent request, but if you would take pity on them in their helplessness and see that they never go hungry or freeze by the roadside, you could show me no greater kindness.
When he had finished, a wail of grief was heard from within the thicket. Tears also rose in Yuan Can's eyes, and he replied that he would gladly carry out Li Zheng's wishes. But Li Zheng's voice abruptly returned to its former self-mocking tone.
In truth, if I were still a man, that is what I should have asked of you first. It is because I was the sort of man who cared more for his paltry poetry than for his wife and children facing hunger and cold that I fell so low as to become this beast.
He added that on the return journey from Lingnan, Yuan Can must under no circumstances take this road. By then Li Zheng might be lost in the tiger's frenzy and attack without recognizing his old friend. He also asked that, after they parted, Yuan Can climb the hill 100 paces ahead and look back in his direction. He would show himself once more in his present form, not to boast of his prowess, but to display his hideous shape and thereby prevent Yuan Can from ever wishing to pass this way and meet him again. Facing the thicket, Yuan Can spoke tender words of farewell and mounted his horse. From among the grasses came another cry of unbearable grief. Yuan Can, repeatedly looking back at the thicket through his tears, set off. When the party reached the top of the hill, they turned as instructed and looked back over the grassy clearing among the trees. Suddenly they saw a tiger spring from the tall grass onto the road. It raised its head toward the moon, now pale and drained of light, and roared 2 or 3 times. Then it leapt back into the thicket from which it had come, and they never saw it again.
The Japanese Mystery Library. Classic mysteries from Japan in English. Subscribe to hear the next story.